Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked from the World Cup in Qatar. I'm Rob Harris from Sky News, also here in Doha, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, and back in England, Martyn Ziegler from the Times. Now, particularly for the world of media, it's been a tragic sort of period for the last few days, mourning the death of Grant Wahl, the esteemed US sports journalist. Tariq, you were at the game, the Argentina-Netherlands game, when he collapsed. What was it like there, and what are your memories?
Yes, really tragic. Just to send our sympathies to Grant's friends, his family, his wife, and his colleagues. It was really shocking. Really, it was just after the 90 minutes had finished, the extra time had started, and there was a commotion, and to call everyone was sort of bewildered, really, calling for the medical aid, which I think, to be fair, arrived as quickly as possible, and in very difficult circumstances, the medics tried to revive Grant, and unfortunately, we're not able to. It's still quite hard to process something like that happening, if I'm honest. And in terms of who he was, as far as American football or soccer is concerned, Grant's role in growing interest in the sport is has been phenomenal over the decades he's been working. So the American football world has lost a really big figure, a giant figure in its modern history.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking, tragic news. We all knew Grant. He, I suppose, first came into the consciousness when he decided he was going to run for the FIFA presidency back in 2011, and he was working for Sports Illustrated at the time. It was a really sort of well conceived idea. I mean, he couldn't get the backing of any of the countries to nominate him, but it certainly put the idea of some sort of FIFA's need for democracy, open democracy, up in the limelight. And from then he moved on. As you say, he was probably the key guy in getting American soccer, both internationally, given some exposure internationally in the media, and also reporting on American soccer issues more generally. So yeah, a great journalist, and very, very sad news.
A pioneering American soccer journalist in terms of his books. He had the Beckham Experiment, which documented David Beckham's arrival at the LA Galaxy and the impact he had. Also, so many cover stories in Sports Illustrated as well. And an avid viewer of football, not only in Europe, but also in the United States. Men's and women's game was also on Fox in the US for a number of years broadcasting, and really the dominant figure in US soccer broadcasting and journalism, helping to sort of project soccer around the world and domestically too.
It must have been tough for you there, Tariq. Absolutely, and everybody who was there in person. And we will remember him, I'm sure.
Yeah, FIFA did put a tribute to him at the England-France World Cup quarter-final. A pitch for him was in the press box, and FIFA officials were there at the hospital in the early hours of Saturday morning after the Friday night game to check on him.
Yeah, Rob, the quarterfinals that took place the day after Grant's death, or the same day, because we found out the tragic news in the morning. As you said, there were tributes at both games, Morocco against Portugal, and France, England. There was a big screen tribute at the game I was at, Morocco against Portugal. And as you said, there was flowers, and Grant's place was kept at the Al Bayt Stadium for France versus England. But yeah, just very shocking. And it's strange, the tournament obviously having that happen, and the World Cup, you just sort of roll on, don't you?
Yeah, and obviously the World Cup can be a quite grueling experience for journalists, something that perhaps fans around the world might struggle to comprehend. Obviously, many would sort of like to be at this World Cup and they aren't, but still journalistically, 4 or 5 weeks you're actually here on the ground, constantly going to games or trying to find news.
Yeah, it can be pretty grueling. We've lost colleagues of ours at previous World Cups. In 2010, a colleague of ours from the Associated Press suffered a heart attack and died in South Africa during the tournament. So it's full on, and for everybody out there, if there's other illnesses around, I'm sure that puts stresses on people's health systems.
Yeah, just was recalling that in 2010 it was Bob Millward from the Associated Press, and again I remember having lunch with him that day. It was the semi-final in Cape Town between Holland and Uruguay. It was another AP journalist there. I think it was Raf Cassett. We were having lunch before the game, and you find the news when you head back to Johannesburg the next day, and it's so sudden, so shocking when these things happen. And just a word for the situation here in Qatar more broadly. I don't know about you, Rob, but the timings, the days just are so long. For example, we've got these 10 p.m. kickoffs. Particularly, let's not forget this was the first 4-game-a-day tournament as well in the group stage, and it's just the days really extended. You tend to go to bed around 3 or 4 a.m. after that 10 p.m. game, and there's been a lot of illness as well through the press pack. Think about British journalists, US journalists, global journalists are coughing and spluttering. I haven't done very well at this particular World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's why even on these recordings, we've not perhaps been as regular as we sort of try to watch for health and rest too. And you think about the staff working at this World Cup as well. If you've got these 10 o'clock games, they go into extra time and penalties as well. It's the staff at the stadiums. They need to get back, particularly from somewhere like Al Bayt, which is the city of Al Khor in the desert, about 45 minutes drive north of Doha. So everyone's got to get back from there working, stewards, staff as well, and be sort of rested up for the next day. So it's, something to consider. While obviously they talk heavily about the 4 games a day and the compact World Cup, that it is still a pretty grueling experience. Our condolences to Grant Wahl's family, particularly his wife, Celine Gounder, at this incredibly difficult and tragic time. And there has been another death at this World Cup as well, a Qatari photographer working for Al-Kas TV, Khalid Al-Mislam. He died on Saturday as well. That's according to the Gulf Times, and incredibly tragic circumstances there, with another journalist dying in this World Cup, also having the death of a worker who died at the Saudi Arabia hotel. There was an accident there, something that's been investigated. What happened when the guard, reportedly from the Philippines, fell off a ramp. We've yet to have the full details of that investigation.
Yeah, I mean, it's all these things are very, very sad and tragic, and probably the defining image we'll take of Grant from this is as him when he turned up at a match, in his first match he went to, wearing a rainbow T-shirt, just to show what happened, and actually he was sort of briefly detained, and it actually became quite a cause célèbre and a really sort of powerful thing for him to have done.
So as we do obviously focus on this World Cup in the final few days, still reflecting on Grant, the wearing of that rainbow T-shirt, still actually yet to hear from FIFA on that or many things.
Yeah, Rob, it's going to be one of the motifs for me of this tournament. I remember the Saudi Arabian fans. Do you remember after they beat Argentina and Lionel Messi, their song was "Where's Messi?" They kept going around Doha looking for Messi, having beaten Argentina 2-1. And I think for the press, it might be "Where's FIFA? Where's Gianni Infantino?" We are almost at the end of the World Cup, and as you said, it's hard to get a comment for sometimes even the most benign issues when you raise them on the record. And as far as Gianni Infantino is concerned, we've had him do that 57-minute monologue at the start of the tournament, and I don't think he's done another media appearance since then. He's done something in-house. I haven't been able to ask him anything unless you know different.
I mean, that was the thing. He did an in-house interview calling it the best group stage ever, but so good they had to film their own interview, FIFA. No independent journalist conducted it.
Yeah, we talked about it this last week, didn't we? About this, the sort of the wall of silence, and it's clearly a deliberate tactic. Because if you don't answer questions, then you don't sort of, maybe the argument is you don't fuel a story, and if it's a story which doesn't project positively on FIFA or the Qatar organisers, then they'll be even less willing to provide that sort of fuel. So it's a shame, and I certainly from a media point of view think it's pretty. I'm not convinced that's the right approach at all. The IOC, for all their faults, have daily briefings. Will respond to questions during the Olympics. All the Olympic organising committees the same. They'll have daily briefings. So I just I'm not sure this has been the right approach.
Obviously, there's been a focus on stadiums. Now, they haven't looked empty in any way compared to, say, the 2019 World Athletics Championships here. But, Tariq, you have raised some doubts over the sparsity of some of the crowds, who's in the crowds, who's filling those crowds when perhaps there are empty seats.
Yeah, it's been a game of trying to find out what the hell's actually going on here, because you'd go to some matches, even some really massive games, and half an hour before kickoff, these stadiums will be half empty or half full, depending on how you look at life. 10 minutes before, still quite empty. Kickoff, still empty. And then suddenly you look up from whatever you were doing, if you were typing on typing a match report or something, 15 minutes into the game, and then a lot of seats seem to be taken. I've seen the fact that doors have been opened for ticketless fans at the start of the tournament. But again, it's something no one wants to talk about. I think it's great to fill the seats up. But again, I suppose that you have to separate that with, people have spent so much money to get here and their own money to buy tickets, that it's just some clarity on this. And the other thing, and this is one of the stories of the tournament, of course, Morocco going to the semi-final of the World Cup, which is a remarkable feat for Morocco, first for African football, the first Arab nation, and the first Arab World Cup, and they've been really heavily supported. There's tens of thousands of Moroccans in Doha. So at that Portugal game, the fact that the stadium was half empty at best at kickoff was really confusing. And then you get the reports from outside, and there's thousands of fans who have been locked out, rings of steel preventing them from getting in. It must be really frustrating. The security plan, I felt, was being stretched to the very, very limit on that day and whenever Morocco plays.
Other thing that I've noticed, which would be quite good to get some sort of response on, is the fact that there seems to be a sort of crackdown on, rainbow armbands, hats, whatever, banners. Yet there's been a sort of fairly liberal approach to when people want to wave the Palestinian flag around. It'd be interesting if the organisers or the Qatari government or FIFA have basically given the sort of turning a blind eye to that, but not to the rainbow flags.
Palestine is a FIFA member, unlike, say, a member of the UN, are they, as a country? So it is a flag of a FIFA country. Generally, I think we see in Europe sometimes UEFA cases might be there's only charges against nations when the Palestinian flag might be being used in a provocative sense against certain teams or countries. Whereas here, obviously, it's a symbol actually of the Arab world. It's been adopted by many fans out here. And something we can get onto in a moment is the story I did about the plan that existed for no room for Islamophobia armbands, which featured a Palestinian headscarf design on them.
Yeah, to be honest, it's been very obvious. This is been a massive platform, the World Cup, for the Arab world to push its causes, and mainly this cause of Palestine. And it's not just the flag, actually. Yes, the flag is everywhere, but it's also, the lettering on it. You've seen Free Palestine written on these giant banners at the stadiums, and you could, assume that is a political gesture under FIFA's terminology, and that's been something I think the local organisers have been very happy with. And it's not just the rainbow flag, Martin. Don't forget the Iranians were barred from bringing any insignia into stadiums that might upset the Iranian regime back in Tehran. The old flag, for example, T-shirts. They were all asked to surrender those entering stadiums in the group stages.
Yeah, it does seem like one rule for one, and one rule for our friends, and one rule for people who aren't. That's for sure. So tell us more about this armband, Rob, the story that you uncovered.
Yes, this was something that I'd heard about and then managed to get hold of an actual design for this No Place for Islamophobia armband. It was something Qatar, officials within Qatar had discussed, conceived, and then raised with other Muslim majority countries like Saudi Arabia and Morocco. They did indicate, my source, that it had been proposed to FIFA, and the fact FIFA had rejected it some weeks ago before the rejection publicly of the rainbow armbands, the One Love armbands. FIFA deny knowledge of them, but obviously my story's been out there and there's been no public denial at all of the story as it has gone round. And obviously we published on Sky the actual image of this No Place for Islamophobia armband, because they saw this World Cup as a potential platform to highlight the issue with Islamophobia.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting, isn't it? That's. I guess once they said that they weren't going to have the One Love armband, and there's no way they could use that. But it is really interesting.
Yeah, and Rob, again, it seems to be I don't want to say, but this tit for tat thing, that was probably this idea, the genesis of that is after the One Love campaign was launched in September. And then what we saw here on the ground was the German Interior Minister wore the One Love armband. And then the next day we see all the Palestinian cause armbands as well in the stadiums, and we've seen them ever since. It just seems if they do that, we'll do this. If they do that, we'll do this. It just seems to be a little bit of a game or ratcheting up one side against the other. It's a bit strange, I guess.
For your experiences out in Qatar, obviously it's a sort of unique World Cup place because it's all in such close proximity. It's going to be very, very different in 4 years' time, 2026, USA, Canada, Mexico, 48 teams, and exactly what it's going to look like. You know, something we've talked about before, but it does look, the plan as it stands is for 16 groups of 3 countries. But Arsene Wenger, the FIFA's head of global football development, has confirmed that's going to be reviewed next year. And it is looking more like 12 groups of 4, 104 matches in total. Going to take at least 35 days, which is 5 longer than this tournament. What do you think?
It's a lot of games, particularly in the early stages. Then when you get to, say, the quarterfinal onwards, suddenly days without games, yet a huge top-loaded number of games, which creates more television opportunities around the world because there are more countries involved. But I suppose there's only a amount of football that one fan could watch.
I interviewed Alex Phillips about this. Alex used to be the head of the UEFA's Asia-Europe affairs, now as an independent consultant working at the moment for FIFA on development projects. He was really interested in this. I mean, he says that whichever way you look at it, 48 teams is going to mean a tournament that's worse than it is now, because 32 is such a good number for a tournament, and it also means it's going to be messier. But are there benefits for football development around the world? And he's not so sure that there are, because he thinks a lot of countries, the poorer countries, they basically, all the money they get from FIFA is, the majority of it is aimed at qualifying for the World Cup. So you get a sort of has-been European coach. You spend heavily on them. They bring in their coaching staff. Give contracts to their mates, and it's actually at the expense of proper football development in those countries. So I think that was an interesting point.
This was a key plan of Gianni Infantino when he was elected. He talked in the campaign about maybe expanding to 40 teams. Then, after winning the election in February 2016, realised actually the maths didn't quite work with 40 teams. He ordered a consultation study. The study showed that actually the optimum sporting format was 32 teams that would produce the best World Cup, and yet he still went ahead with gaining the approval of the FIFA membership to expand to 48 teams.
Yeah, I don't get this beyond the fact of the FIFA politics, the fact this guy needs to be elected every 4 years, and if it's not him, someone else. You just give away more and more things to the people who count, which isn't, I guess, clubs or fans or any other stakeholder in the world, but 211 FAs. And this is the giveaway, right? Every time. More money for development, an expanded World Cup. But at the end of the day, the tournament, the thing that we all love, the thing that he said was the best ever, that group stage, will never be repeated thanks to this. 48 teams, 35 days a minimum, Martin. I mean, it's This risk is going to be really boring as well, isn't it? I mean, all these games that are just kind of being played for the sake of being played. There's not going to be much of a thrill. And the best thing about this World Cup for me on the field has been those double headers. They've just been mad. The last set of group games, Name Your Group, has just been absolutely insane and created some really good headlines and great TV moments.
Well, I suppose that's the reason why they wanted to, you can say that's the reason why they wanted to keep the groups of four, is that if you have a group of three, then you don't have a double header. You have one match and then one team who's not playing in that group, and that sort of raises the risk of collusion between the two teams greatly. So I can understand why that's been seen as a problem. So I think there is no elegant solution to this. I think it's.
I can. You can go back to 32 and say I was wrong.
Yeah.
Who might this help most? I'm trying to think of the nationalities of three of the top people at FIFA: Swiss, Scottish, Swedish.
Oh yeah. Well, you think this is the only way that they can be sure that their countries qualify?
Yeah, they might get a chance to watch them in 2026.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I was going to say, the TV deals that have been done for 2026. I mean, I presume they've been done with 48 teams. A lot of them. I think the ones with Fox and beIN Sport were actually done before that decision was taken.
They were.
Yeah. So, but for the other ones, I guess they've been sold on a 48 team tournament. So, FIFA not going to break that, are they? Because it'll cost them money.
There is one nationality I didn't mention: Senegal, one of the most senior people at FIFA, Fatma Samora, the Secretary General, but we never actually hear from her.
We haven't seen her very visibly, certainly as a member of the press corps. We have seen her tweeting, I suppose. I mean, that'll be my recollection of her period in office, sort of live tweeting football matches from all over the world, be it the boys under 17 World Cup, the men's World Cup, a regional tournament. She has become one of the most prolific live tweeters of live football internationally that I can think of.
I did see a clip of her briefly being filmed by a journalist last week, being asked about the death of the Filipino worker at the training base where Saudi Arabia were, and she refused to comment, and that was it.
Well, that's the situation at the World Cup. Some other stories that have been around, and we're back to the ban on Russia in international sports. Of course, Russia banned from completing qualifying for this World Cup, and we had in the summer Russian and Belarusian players banned from competing in tennis tournaments in Britain, including Wimbledon, and there has now been a consequence, with the Lawn Tennis Association fined $1 million by the ATP, and there's a further threat of sanctions as well, isn't there?
Yeah, the AT have threatened to kick the Lawn Tennis Association out of the tour. The WTA have already done that as well, and I think Wimbledon are looking like the signals coming from there is that they'll sort of lift the ban on the Russians and the Belarusians, just because the rest of tennis basically hasn't done the same, and that they've let them go ahead, and there hasn't been misbehaviour by Russian players, and there's no sort of those pro-war Z signs. So I think they're going to have to do it. The other interesting thing last week was the IOC taking what is very clearly, although they tried to I think disguise it, but it is very clearly the first steps towards reintroducing Russians and to allow them to take part as neutrals in the Paris Olympics.
Yeah, and it's not surprising. This is exactly as you would imagine the IOC would behave, because they always take a hard line when there's no event. So it was very easy to ban Russia when there is nothing really at stake. They were very strong, if you remember, when the war was started, when the invasion started. And now we come to the business end of qualifying for the Olympics. And guess what? Well, it's probably time to reintegrate Russian athletes. And it might be. But again, let's just recall how they've operated here. It's never when there's a squeeze on the IOC would they push and punish Russia. It's normally around these bits when it's kind of easy to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's only because I think the Olympic qualifiers are due to start next year that they sort of think, oh God, if the Russians can't take part in the Olympic qualifiers, and some of them, then they're not going to be able to qualify for Paris, and then we're in a tricky position here. But some of the sort of justifications I thought was pretty bad. Like one of the justifications was that the initial recommendation for a ban from international competition was for the protection of the athletes involved, which I thought, I mean, let's and that threat no longer exists. I mean, I thought that was pretty lame. And then using sort of this thing about politics shouldn't interfere with sport whatsoever. I mean, if you could use that argument for allowing apartheid South Africa to have been in the Olympics, absolutely nonsense.
Yeah, there's that potential of Russian athletes winning medals being celebrated in the heart of Paris in less than 2 years. As things stand, Russia's war on Ukraine does continue, and certainly no sign of a complete Russian withdrawal.
No, and also just taking the war, putting the war to one side, Russia's behaviour in sports has not changed at all. Do you remember the case of the figure skater Valieva, the 15-year-old? There was supposed to be a doping investigation. And what did the Russians do? They did it secretly, have refused to provide any of the details of that investigation, even to WADA, and have said it's been handled. And it's, again, this Russia kind of leading the rest of the sporting world a merry dance, and then end up getting reintegrated at every turn. We've kind of done 6 or 7 of these stories over the last decade or so, and it's always Russia, and they always kind of get their way in the end.
Yeah, the IOC, I mean, notorious for avoiding any sort of strong negative stance towards somebody like Russia. I mean, it has been like that for years and years and years. And they're also, another thing the IOC is always very reluctant to do is actually take disciplinary action against its members. And something we've flagged up a few times is Pat Hickey, the Irish IOC member who was arrested in Rio naked by the police, memorably naked, and was charged with ticket offences. He's been on bail ever since. He's been under investigation by the IOC Ethics Commission for 6 years, and he's suddenly resigned, said he's not going to be an IOC member anymore, and that means that the Ethics Commission they can't do anything now, do they? So that they're off the hook.
Yeah, the least transparent ethics process, I think. If you compare with like FIFA and UEFA, we give a kicking on disciplinary matters quite regularly. The IOC's is just completely opaque. We get hardly any window, and Pat Hickey wouldn't be the first of these members who'd faced years-long secret kind of internal disciplinary processes and leave before there's any conclusion. I can't think of a senior figure there that has gone through a full investigation and the outcome has been public.
As we finish up this week's episode, some news on one of the ongoing significant issues in the world of sport, transgender policies, and this one from the United States.
Yeah, very interesting this. Obviously a very difficult subject for lots of sports bodies, but US Rowing, I think, have come up with the most sort of bizarre policy, which I can imagine. So for their domestic events, any rower who identifies as female can row in the women's events. Anyone who identifies as male can row in the men's events. But for the mixed gender events, if you have to be female at birth to take part in the as a woman. So it just makes no sense to me. And lots of campaigners said, actually, well, this looks like it's protecting males, and it's not protecting women at all. A very, very strange policy.
But really strange, Martin. So can you just clarify something, I guess, with this? If what you've said is the policy here, would the representative in the mixed rowing race have to compete under a different gender in the different disciplines? So they'd be considered a woman in the women's race, but then would have to be a man, recognized as a man in the men's race in order to compete.
Correct. Very strange indeed.
One will be keeping an eye on Sport Unlocked, and that about brings an end to this week's episode from the World Cup in Qatar. For myself, Rob Harris, Tariq, Panja and Martyn Ziegler. You can message us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. But for now, goodbye.